Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pat Pelletier from Congressman Paul Mitchell's office, for those that are not aware who I am. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join us for this edition of the Cargo Air Association's member and stakeholder roundtable on the cargo response to coronavirus and the activities they've been doing. As we get some more members joining us and more attendees joining us, one quick technical note for you all. Clearly, we all are familiar now with events during Zoom, how we need to not talk over each other, and sometimes there's technical issues. If anyone does have technical issues as we proceed this afternoon, please feel free to email me. It's patpelletier@mail.house.gov. The last name is P-E-L-L-E-T-I-E-R. Again, pat.pelletier@mail.house.gov for any technical issues that arise. And with that, I'll turn over to Leighton with Congresswoman Bustos.
Hi, everyone. Like Pat said, thanks for joining us today. This is our latest Air Cargo Caucus briefing on the importance of air cargo to the economy, specifically in the pandemic in this instance. If you've attended a briefing with us before, you know this is a bipartisan group that's focused on educating and sharing information. We're not pushing any sort of agenda. We just want to recognize the importance that this industry serves our country. As for the run of show, we will be hearing first from our co-chairs, Co-Chair Mitchell and then Co-Chair Bustos, and then we will hear from Congressman Garrett Graves and Congresswoman Sharice Davids. Gina will be introducing them, and then we can turn it over to the members. After that, we will be hearing from an industry panel about what they're seeing on the ground, how their companies are operating right now. And hopefully we can get a better understanding of just everything that these industry stakeholders are doing right now, which is a lot. Gina?
Thanks, Leighton. Hi, everyone. I'm Gina Zuckerman, the Vice President of Legislative Policy for the Cargo Airline Association. So we're proud to partner with the Air Cargo Caucus today to bring you this webinar. The caucus is a bipartisan one with over 41 members, and it was started last February in 2019. It brings together members from all over the country who have an understanding of the importance of air cargo in their home districts, as well as to the US and world economy. And right now, air cargo is sort of a bright spot in the aviation industry. Domestic volumes are up over 15% over last year at this time. And several of our companies are actually still hiring employees, getting ready for peak season, which is already happened. So we're interested to see what happens moving forward as we have already 1 million employees worldwide, and we expect to see more as time goes on. So as Leighton and Pat mentioned, today you'll hear from our Air Cargo Caucus co-chairs and founding members, Representative Paul Mitchell from Michigan's 10th District, who sits on the T&I committee, Representative Sharice Bustos from Illinois' 17th District, who represents the area where Rockford Airport continues to serve as a significant economic engine, Representative Garrett Graves from Louisiana's 6th District, who serves as the ranking member of the Aviation Subcommittee, and Representative Sharice Davids from Kansas' 3rd District, and she serves as the T&I Committee's Vice Chair. So after the congressional remarks, we'll move to the industry panel. And just one note before I turn it over to Representative Mitchell, as many of you know, he is retiring this year. So we want to take the opportunity to especially thank him for both founding and supporting the Air Cargo Caucus. We really appreciate that. So now we'll turn it over to Mr. Mitchell, and note this event is being recorded.
I'll try to behave myself, and thank you. And thanks for organizing this and putting together all the participants that have joined us. I really appreciate it. I think one of the things we try to do is try to get more information out that more members should be part of the Air Cargo Caucus because it impacts nearly all their districts. As you noted, air cargo is up dramatically. The delivery of an awful lot of goods these days is by air cargo. Fewer and fewer people are going to stores for traditional things that they have in the past shopped for, and they're shopping online. Online shopping is up massively. And it is a bright spot in the economy while retailers, the brick and mortar retailers in many places struggle. I think I'd like to mention it's important that we recognize the role of air cargo in assisting with PPE during the worst parts of the pandemic. because it was an important component and continues to be, but it was so critical in those months of March, April, May. I think at least every other day, sometimes every day, I was on the telephone with the White House, with the task force, with hospitals, with our governor's office about PPE in Michigan and about the need for PPE. An awful lot of that came in initially by air to a location and then was shipped into Michigan, sometimes directly by air into Michigan. Without the air link that was used so extensively, we would have had some real crises in terms of masks, gowns, basic PPE that no one planned for. We could talk about all the whys, but let's be honest about it. The volume that we were using and continue to use PPE in this country, it was massive. The demands were such that there were days that we were down to 1 or 2 days of PPE at best in some of our facilities, which had me on the telephone with the task force saying, where do we go? What do we do? How do we get what's basically needed? As you know, Michigan had a pretty significant crisis there for a while. Now, the good news about the COVID crisis, at least both I think nationally, but also in Michigan, is while we're at about 50% of the caseload we had at the peak, and we are with all the activities of summer, people going back to school, shock, college students don't do as well with social distancing, imagine that. We're at about 50% caseload of what it was in March. Hospitalizations though in Michigan are down below 400, about 360, down dramatically. And the death rate is down. The death rate's been reduced by 40% overall. And that is all good news as hospitals, as clinicians learn to deal with treating the worst components of COVID going forward. Doesn't make it go away, but at least we're at a better pace and there's less demand on our healthcare system. But the ability to deliver goods and services in this country has clearly become even increasingly dependent on air cargo. So I will continue to advocate that members across this country engage in it, because there are very few places in the country that would have had the things they needed, both routine things consumers want, as well as PPE in the midst of a crisis, if it weren't for the ability of air cargo to deliver quickly what was needed. And credit to many of the people on this call who had planes and crew going in and out of China, had to struggle with sometimes getting them into China or back out of China. We had all kinds of issues with that I'm aware of, and some of that was just the Chinese being difficult, let's be honest about it. But credit to all of you and your crews and your staff for managing that, because I know it was not an easy set of circumstances. So I want to thank everybody for all the efforts, recognize the importance in our economy. Last but not least, I want to thank everyone for the support and help as we kick this off. Co-Chair Bustos, all of you, this will be my last Cargo Caucus event. Garrett Graves is throwing me off, and okay, Garrett, and I'll be retiring, but I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed getting to know all of you. And yes, I will do a round with the UPS maybe before Christmas here, so I can actually, I've been to the facility, but I will go around and deliver packages. I'll put my Santa outfit on and make myself productive one more time. So with that, I'll yield back. I believe I'm yielding to Co-Chair Bustos. And thanks again. If I can help with anything in the interim, please let me know. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Representative Bustos.
Oops. Am I unmuted? I think I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted now, yes.
Okay, very good. I'm sitting in my chief of staff's car because I don't know how the rest of the members organize this, but I ran in and voted really quickly and came back out. But let me start out by just saying thanks to Congressman Graves and Congresswoman Davids for being on this call today. But most importantly, I want to thank our caucus co-founder and co-chair, Congressman Mitchell, who, as you just heard, is retiring. He's been a great partner on this. You know, this is, obviously for that reason, our last caucus event together this Congress. And I just want everybody to know just really how proud I am of this caucus and how we've worked together in bipartisan fashion. You know, this is an example of, obviously there's no reason that any of this has to be partisan. Although I think there's so much that shouldn't be partisan that ends up being partisan. So, but we've engaged our congressional offices and industry leaders to understand the importance of air cargo to our communities. But really, it's been, I think a tremendous effort, and And Congressman, you've been a wonderful partner, and Pat on your staff has been wonderful. So we're going to miss both of you as we move ahead, but we will charge on. But when we founded this caucus, we knew that air cargo is responsible for creating millions of jobs and critical to the movement of goods in our economy. But obviously, when the pandemic hit, as Paul was talking about, it just proved how essential you are to our economy, from delivering PPE to handling online sales that are just off the charts. Your industry has been absolutely critical to responding to what's going on in the pandemic. Gina, in your intro of me, you mentioned the Chicago Rockford International Airport. Let me just tell you very quickly what this means to a congressional district like mine. That airport was the fastest growing cargo airport in the world from 2018 to 2019. So, and it's seen a 25% year-over-year growth from 2019 to 2020. You know, a lot of this has been driven by the PPE shipments and e-commerce sales, but those are the types of numbers that make the operations at our airports a true economic driver. And in a region like mine, when a family of four makes somewhere around $47,000, these are jobs, they're good paying jobs, and we need what we can get to shore up our economy. To help underscore just how vital the air cargo industry has been to the pandemic response, let me just tell you about an effort that that was specific to this call that we're on. So way back in May, and you know that seemed like what, a lifetime away, but when the full weight and the severity of the pandemic was just really hitting us hard, there was all this scramble to get PPE and medical equipment, things like thermometers for hospitals that were in need. So that's the specific quick story I want to share. The largest employer in my congressional district is a health system called OSF Healthcare. They have a presence in many of our counties. They're, again, good paying jobs. And they were having issues with the shipments of thermometers that were intended for the pandemic health workers. And it was Roger Libby from DHL on our industry panel today, who worked with my office to make sure that these shipments were classified correctly and were able to get prioritized. And so as a result, thousands of thermometers made it to my district in the time that they were needed. So Roger, thank you very much for helping with that. It's just one example, and I know there are many like that, but of the kind of leadership that your industry has shown. So please know we are sincerely grateful for the way that you've all navigated this extremely, extremely challenging time, and look forward to the industry panel sharing more about the companies that you've all managed. And with that, Gina, I'll turn it back to you for our next speaker today. Thank you, everybody. It's great to be with you.
Thank you, Congressman Bustos. I really appreciate it. And next, we'll be hearing from Congressman Garrett Graves from Louisiana's 6th District.
Right. There we go. All right. Hey, good afternoon. Appreciate the opportunity to join you. And Congressman Mitchell, I know yesterday you said that it was the first time I was going to have to listen to you speak, and I thought you did a fantastic job. And I look forward to, or I wish we were going to have many, many more of those. But very seriously, I want to thank Congressman Mitchell and Congressman Bustos for creating the caucus. This is obviously a really important issue area that has really been thrust to the forefront as a result of coronavirus. And I'm not just saying that because I know that our Amazon and other online sales have skyrocketed over the last few months, but I think that that's been happening around the United States and around the globe. And the cargo industry has stepped up and done a remarkable job responding to that and ensuring that we don't have extraordinary losses in service. And you know, when you think about it, this isn't just about you delivering the increase in packages, but because of the passenger airline decrease, there's been a lot of cargo that was flying on those planes that was shifted over, and you all have been able to absorb that. Now, in the CARES Act, we did make some pretty significant investments in airports around the country. I wasn't a huge fan of the formula that determined how those dollars were handed out, but we did put some pretty significant investments in airports, and I know that those infrastructure investments and investments in our aviation system are really important for us to continue making. But with some of the tax decisions that were made earlier this year, we now have an aviation trust fund that is insolvent. And so we are going to need to pay very close attention to that and make sure that we step up and fund the aviation trust fund to ensure that aviation operations, that FAA operations and others can continue across the United States. Also know that as a result of some of the increase in trade sensitivity and trade fairness, there have been some challenges and probably going to continue to be some challenges as we adjust our trade relations with China and other countries. And so we want to make sure that we do stay in touch and very active engagement on learning about those implications and how we can best address or mitigate any impacts from some of those decisions moving forward. But let me just say again, I want to thank Paul and Sherry. Thank you all very much for creating the caucus. I want to thank the industry for y'all's remarkable and agile response to coronavirus. I know that Amazon Prime was delayed for a few days, but y'all were able to very quickly get things up and running again, and we just appreciate y'all's contribution to our economy, because certainly the economic disruptions and just the regular family disruptions and small business disruptions would have been much greater if y'all had not stepped in and filled those voids and addressed the surge capacity needs. So thanks very much for y'all's efforts.
Thank you, Congressman Graves. Next up, we have Congressman Sharice Davids from Kansas's 3rd District.
Hitting all the unmute and show my video and everything. Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, I am so glad that I'm able to join you all today, even though we're doing everything virtual these days, but this is certainly an unprecedented time. So I appreciate everyone's flexibility, and it's just I'm very, very pleased to be speaking alongside my colleagues and fellow members of the Air Cargo Caucus, some of whom are also my colleagues on the House T&I committee. And I appreciated Congressman Graves' comments, and there were so many points that he brought up that I agree with. And then, of course, Sherry Bustos. I know folks are sharing some of their the things that are going on in their districts, and this is like such an important and particularly interesting topic right now, because I mean, air cargo couldn't be more important right now. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but e-commerce traffic having grown so much in the last 6 months because of the pandemic is certainly something that we're all thinking about. And I know it's already been said, but I have been amazed to see the ways that our freight folks have responded to this really once in a lifetime challenge, and particularly the cargo industries. And so with the vital role that you all are playing to make sure that people are getting the products that they need, like Sherry was saying, even things like thermometers or PPE, all of this stuff is so important. And then getting things to consumers' doorsteps and small businesses, in a district like mine, in the Kansas 3rd, this is, we've got one of the busiest intermodal shipping hubs. I know cargo airlines are also helping to keep our local airports busy as we're seeing very low passenger traffic. And so I'm really eager and anxious to continue to hear about air cargo's role during this pandemic. Also would please just encourage folks to continue to reach out. I know I've had some really great conversations with folks, even just in the last few months. And I really want to continue to hear about and figure out ways to be supportive, as this stuff relates to rolling out care and treatment for people who are affected by COVID, our businesses that are being affected. And I know you all are the ones who are going to be able to help us in these positions come up with and push for and advocate for the most effective policy. So thank you for continuing to reach out. Thank you for inviting me, and I will turn it back over now.
Thank you, Congresswoman Davids. Really appreciate your comments and those of everyone who's spoke so far. So now I'm actually going to turn it over to Yvette Rose, who is the Senior Vice President for the Cargo Airline Association. And to begin the second portion of our webinar, where we'll have our industry panel discussion.
Hello, and welcome to the industry panel portion of today's event. I thank you, Gina, for the introduction, and thank you again to the Air Cargo Caucus chairs and members. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today's panel as they appear on my screen from left to right. I think they're popping in as we speak. Roger Libby, Executive Vice President for Corporate Public Policy for DHL. Jim Forbes, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for Atlas Air. Bob Boha, Vice President, Flight Operations for ABX Air. Bobby Wells, Vice President, Safety and Airworthiness for FedEx Express. And Houston Mills, Vice President, Flight Operations and Safety for UPS. Each of our speakers' bios were sent to all attendees via the registration email. So today, our speakers are going to share some of their COVID-19 response efforts, impacts, lessons learned, and as we look ahead towards economic recovery and certainly the storage, distribution, and delivery of a vaccine, air cargo will play a key role. Most importantly, safety is always our top priority, and the safety and health of our employees is no different. This crisis has demanded that we be adaptable, resilient, and ready to respond, and air cargo is uniquely positioned to meet these challenges head on. So keeping our focus on safety first, I'm going to turn it over to Bobby with FedEx. Can you share some of your thoughts on the importance of safety as air cargo was deemed essential in responding to the pandemic, and any lessons learned?
Thanks, Yvette, and thanks for this opportunity to talk about the critical service that's provided by air cargo. Safety is central to everything we do at FedEx. We have a people-first philosophy at FedEx, and that means that in order to support our people who deliver service to our customers, we have to provide a safe and effective environment for them. In this crisis, fear at the beginning ran rampant, so it was critically important for us to make sure we communicated effectively to our employees, that we took every action possible, even to the point of sourcing some of our disinfecting supplies locally in order to provide access to our employees because the supply chain was so constrained around PPE and disinfecting products. We have endeavored to meet or exceed the CDC and WHO's guidelines all along. It was important for us to be consistent in communicating to our employees and to give them a sense of comfort that when they came to work, they would have all the supplies necessary for them to be effective in their jobs. Now, we also introduced temperature testing at our locations so that we could identify anybody who posed a risk as they came to work. And then we, as quickly as possible, were able to implement COVID testing as well for our employees. So for us, safety is really about, you said it, resiliency, and it's also about sustainability. We can't continue to do our mission every day if we don't have some assurance that our employees will be willing and able to come to work and perform their duties as required effectively and safely.
Thank you, Bobby. Houston, from a UPS perspective, could you take that same question, share with us your thoughts of your response and safety aspects?
Absolutely. I think, first of all, I think Bobby framed it up very nicely. It's really been a privilege and quite frankly, a great responsibility to be, for UPS to be considered, one of the critical infrastructure businesses as designated by governments around the world. So we take that designation very seriously. So, safety is always at the forefront of everything we do. And I would add that, in this pandemic, if anything was demonstrated, is the absolute necessity for people to trust us. You know, to trust that we have their best interests in heart, because our folks are and I had the privilege to serve in the Marine Corps years ago, and the Marines are always at the tip of the spear. Well, in this pandemic, you know, our pilots literally operating in and out of Asia from the very beginning of this pandemic and other places around the world have been at the tip of the spear. And so for them to do that, they had to have absolute confidence that we as an organization had their interest in mind. So that means from disinfecting protocols from facilities to aircraft to providing, making sure that all of our policies and everything that we deal with is in line with the FAA, with the DOT, with WHO, with CDC, that all those best practices were just a normal part of what we did. Not only that, you know, some of our folks were fearful. You know, so we went above and beyond, and we established special voluntary flying opportunities for folks who, quite frankly, they have things going at home they didn't want to fly in China at the beginning of this pandemic. So we established a voluntary program where our folks could opt out of actually flying, so those who didn't have the same safety concerns could continue to do so. So from a social distancing, face masking, temperature control, testing, you know, for making sure we have isolated transportation, you know, hotel logistics, all the things that other countries would expect us to do as we're coming into their countries to make sure that we aren't bringing things in those countries are the very things that we work hard on. The other thing too is it's very important, and that is we got our people to understand, you know, that not only were we looking out for their safety, but it's important for them to look out for the safety of others. So we were very much emphasized, folks, not coming to work if you don't feel well. You know, so don't think that you're selling us short by not showing up. You know, think about your partner, because we have very extensive tracing processes and everything else. So someone who comes in leaning forward to help us out could very well do the exact opposite. So it's a critical infrastructure employee, very important that we have that trust factor with our people so they continue to lean forward. And knowing that we're doing those things necessary, you know, to ensure that they're safe when they come home to their families is absolutely essential.
Thank you, Houston. Jim, let's move to the Atlas, and would you share with us some of your conditions for your workers, how they've remained at the highest level, and any additional lessons learned? Jim, we're having trouble hearing you.
Thanks, Yvette. I appreciate that. It's great to be part of the panel. And, you know, I do want to start off by saying that safety is really a top priority for all of us here at Atlas Air. With our headquarters based right outside of New York City, and we have an extensive global network of operations that extends into several cities into China, our Atlas employees felt the impact really early in the pandemic. We immediately established a Corona task force that continues to meet several times a week, and they continue to anticipate and work on solutions as the operating environment constantly changes. The task force has been critical information clearinghouse for all functions in our company, and they've been able to formulate a coordinated response. The task force ensures that we follow critical guidance from the US government agencies, as well as the health organizations. It's also important to recognize how the incredible efforts of all of our employees, but especially our crew members, who operated right there on the front lines. They continue to do a tremendous job, and we deeply appreciate all of their efforts. We worked extremely close with them and our pilots union to develop safety protocols throughout the pandemic. These protocols have played an important role in keeping all of our crews safe and reducing the spread of COVID throughout the communities in which we operate. So back to you, Yvette.
Thanks, Jim, for sharing that. Bob, ABX, could you take that same question, talk a little bit about your lessons learned and the conditions of safety?
Absolutely. As with my colleagues, we follow obviously the CDC guidelines. We've taken it a step further beyond just PPEs. We have at all the hub areas that we locate, we have our own transportation provided by the company. It's disinfected every time we have a crew come in and out. We have dislocated from the hub areas to provide a common room just for our crews. We've put extra food on the airplanes, as we've quickly found out in some locations. The local restrictions are obviously greater than what the national restrictions are, and food was a problem for some of our crews, so we did that. One of the things that we have offered the flight crews is a self-quarantine effort if they think they've been exposed, rather than take the chance that they're in such a confined environment. And we are a smaller carrier, rather than spreading that to a number of people. It's highly infectious. Obviously, we allow them to choose to self-quarantine if they feel that they've come into contact, or at least close contact, with someone that already has COVID. Probably one of the other things that we felt was very, very important is early on, we isolated our simulator technicians, feeling that if they could, that's a small group of people, they work on the simulators, and if they have an outbreak within that area, we could very easily shut down training events and have problems getting our crews trained and checked. The dispatch area, similar to the simulator area, it's a restricted area by law to begin with, but it is under lockdown at this point. Nobody gets in and out unless they have an absolute need to get in and out of there, even for business type things. We have daily COVID meetings just to check on people. We've had a couple, fortunately, we have only had a couple crews that have come down with it. They were mild cases. And we continue to monitor the situation daily, and it does change worldwide, and it is very dynamic.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. So we're going to shift a little bit, and thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts on all the conditions and what you've done to maintain the highest level of safety. So let's move to the operational side. Obviously, the adaptability that we've had to put into place, fostering our continuity of operations, but having to be flexible because of all the dynamic changes, both locally and from a global supply chain perspective. Roger, DHL, could you share your thoughts on that aspect?
Sure, thank you, Yvette, and I appreciate Congressman Mitchell and Congressman Bustos for not only getting the air cargo call started, but for inviting us all. And most importantly, flexibility has been paramount throughout the response to this crisis. First, and we've touched on a few of these so far in some of the other comments, but remind ourselves the range of challenges that we faced at the outset of this crisis. We had limited air cargo capacity as passenger aircraft were pulled down. There's only so much capacity was out there in the networks. Individual airports and country flight restrictions, which forced rerouting of our own networks, pilot restrictions and uncertainty about the rules that they would face in each country, complex customs procedures and regulations that were imposed to improve security. There was massive volume increases, obviously, in PPE and prioritization of cleaning supplies and other commodities. And then we even faced export restriction questions about whether or not PPE coming into the United States for our own employees globally would be subject to export restrictions. So all of this came in, and what it did was show us that air cargo is both essential in the response, but also vulnerable if there are overly restrictive rules and restrictions during a crisis. If government takes an overly prescriptive view, it can actually impede its own ability to respond. And so to put the volume in context, so far UNICEF has sourced 2,000 times more medical gloves in 2020 than it did in 2019. And in 1 week alone, DHL Express moved 168,000 shipments of masks, gloves, respirators, disinfectant wipes into the Americas. And so all of that is showing that maximum flexibility was needed in routing, timing, clearance procedures, and supply chain management. So without that flexibility, then we couldn't do things from a local perspective, like help a family in Brunswick, New Jersey, that was collecting PPE for local first responders in the New York, New Jersey area back in March when it was hard to find. That kind of flexibility was essential both for the past event, but also will be essential for any new crisis coming forward or resurgence of the existing coronavirus.
Thank you, Roger. Jim, let's shift back to you from an Atlas perspective as a global supply chain. Could you talk about your operational need for flexibility?
Yeah, Bet. And, Roger talked about it and hit probably all of the real critical issues that we faced immediately. I will say that a key point was the collaboration between a lot of the air carriers and all of us sharing ideas and how we were solving the continuing problems that showed up. The other piece was the work of the Air Cargo Caucus and making the world leaders know how important air cargo was as a lifeline to keep product moving during this critical time around the world. I mean, China is a great example. Under the U.S.-China air agreements, charter flights between key U.S. and Chinese cities were capped. And early in the pandemic, you were able to get the cap waived for a year to allow U.S. carriers to meet the demand for charters to carry the PPE and other critical supplies that were needed. Another really important aspect about it is the U.S. open skies. I mean, this aviation agreement has provided the cargo carriers with the flexibility to efficiently transport our goods throughout the world. The open skies agreements really helps alleviate the shortages as cargo carriers were transporting products to the U.S. without having to negotiate overflight and landing rights in countries where those products were located. So I think those are some really good examples.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. So we're going to shift our panel now as we move towards the recovery piece. Air cargo has always been a contributor to the global economy, now more than ever, the transportation lifeline that matters most. So what role will air cargo play in supporting the economic recovery? Bobby, from a FedEx perspective, can you share your thoughts?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. Well, we've talked a lot about in the past the actions that everyone has taken and how essential they were to bring us to where we are today. What we know at FedEx is that there is no other segment of the transportation industry that can reach so many markets quickly to help economic turnaround and to respond to medical crises. So without air cargo, we would never be able to reach as many locations, touch as many individuals and families, and be able to help and assist the medical community. It's part of our DNA at FedEx because we think of it as connecting people and creating possibilities and creating opportunity, providing access to markets that would otherwise be unavailable, and doing that in an incredibly quick fashion. At FedEx, we can flex our network and adjust our lift to meet the evolving demands as we have done from the beginning of the crisis, and we expect to continue to do going forward. Jim, I think, or maybe it was Roger, talked about the restriction of belly volume early in the crisis. In 1 week alone, FedEx flew 250 flights into China to get out volume that would otherwise not be able to find its way out. In our fourth quarter of FY20, which was March, April, and May of this year, we flew 530 extra flights over and above our base schedule, which is, I'm sure, very similar to the experience that other carriers had during that period of time. So the ability of our crews, our maintenance technicians, our dispatchers to respond to this incredible demand meant that we could provide assistance and that we could deliver the goods and services, or the goods needed where they were most needed. It amounted to 42 kilotons of PPE in 7 months from February to August, and 1.7 billion masks, which we know are critical for our ability to continue to combat this disease going forward. So providing that protection to the air network for cargo is going to continue to be critically important as we now pivot and address both the vaccine as well as the recovery of economies around the world.
Thank you, Bobby. Roger, you talked about flexibility in operations. How does that relate to economic recovery? You could give us your thoughts.
Thanks, and I agree with everything that Bobby was saying is about the role that we play in the economic strength of the economy. Normally, the pandemic just stepped it up that much more. I guess I would put it this way: the businesses large and small across the spectrum, everybody has been affected, both in the supply chain and manufacturing side, or in terms of retail, but we've all been affected by what's going on. But the one thing that's been evident is that if there has been one segment that has been more negatively affected and more vulnerable, it's been small business. The small businesses, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, they often don't have the access to capital that larger companies do, or redundant supply chains, and they don't have the footprint. And so for them, the pandemic has been some of the most difficult. I would say, though, that they have those same small businesses, and they can, again, include anything down to micro-sized enterprise with just a handful of people, but they're also the most flexible in their ability to engage in an e-commerce strategy and pivot on how they operate. And so this environment, if anything, has taught businesses, large and small, about the importance of being flexible and adapting to a new environment. And I would say that the small businesses already were relying on air cargo, and particularly the express delivery side of that, to access global markets, find customers, and essentially make their businesses more resilient. I think of an example of Adafruit up in New York City. They're a technology-based company. They were originally making electronics, and they switched during this crisis to producing ventilator parts, including temperature and pressure sensors, obviously in response to the COVID crisis and the needs that they were seeing in New York. They partnered with DHL because they saw both a need in their community, but also an ability to partner with air cargo that allowed them to make that possible, to source the component parts, to build it here in the United States, and to get those components to the various hospital complexes around the country. So really, I'd say from a flexibility standpoint, small businesses and the economy as a whole, they're going to see once again how important air cargo is as an essential service, not just for the health and safety side, but also for the economic recovery side going forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Roger. So we've learned a little bit about the response, efforts, impacts, the economic recovery. We're still in the midst of the pandemic. We have had some visibility into the challenges, but we're going to now shift a little bit to the types of policies or dialogues that need to take place to ensure a robust recovery. Jim, can you share your thoughts on that?
Sure, Yvette. I think what challenged our operation the most during the pandemic, at the top of the list to me, is really the changing regulations and the inconsistency of those regulations around the world that our pilots had to endure as they were trying to clear customs. And I do want to say that through the U.S. and the leadership of the G7, they worked to coordinate a statement of principles, which was a first significant step towards really trying to harmonize the treatment and protection of the air crews, especially in China. The U.S. Department of State and Transportation were excellent partners throughout this pandemic, and they worked diligently to advance the principles. Our view is that expanding these principles more broadly is critical to enabling our cargo carriers to continue to respond to the pandemic. And ultimately, the recovery is tied, I think, to better and faster testing methods and the eventual distribution of a vaccine. So to support those objectives, I'd offer two recommendations. First, once a vaccine is available, consider making that accessible to cargo flight crews, especially those operating international routes, as early in the process as possibly be done. And also, as the new rapid testing technologies come online, we need to consider securing testing machines for use at airports where multiple airlines are located. This would allow more efficient and better use of the machines and better industry adoption, instead of having each airline and each company trying to secure testing machines of their own. So those would be my inputs.
Thanks, Jim. Those are great specific examples. Appreciate that. Bob, ABX Air, would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Sure. Probably the one word that I would have for everyone is flexibility. As Jim appropriately mentioned, the rules were changing at many different countries, sometimes daily. Sometimes countries would not allow an alternate airport to be used, for instance. They just didn't want to spread COVID. FAA was very quick in responses to training events, checking events, medical requirements. They issued special regulations for that, and I would encourage that to continue, and it's an essential piece of our business. As far as distribution of a vaccine, if it should become available, or at least as far as recovery efforts are concerned, we may want to consider adopting a craft type program where the rules are relaxed, safety isn't compromised, but yet we can be more productive with the resources we have. I agree with Jim that inoculation of essential workers, not just flight crews, but anyone in the business that could directly impact the slowdown of carriage of cargo, be inoculated first. And again, flexibility. That's the one thing that we learned, and it's the one thing I believe will continue into the future because there's a lot that is unknown.
Thank you, Bob. We appreciate everyone's insights into the challenges, our role in the economic recovery, looking ahead as best we can, even though we're still in the midst of the pandemic. Now we're going to focus a little bit on future resiliency and trying to look ahead, hopefully in the near future, specifically about the facilitation of a vaccine. We had several questions submitted in advance related to this. So Roger, DHL, I know is working on this. So could you give us your thoughts on the vaccine distribution?
Sure, and Yvette, really that is the question of the moment. Although much of the focus has been so far on helping the COVID-19 vaccines sort of leapfrog the development phases, we really do need to look now at the distribution of what could be as many as 10 billion vaccines globally. And that's going to face unique challenges and require closer partnerships with the logistics and air cargo industry than we've probably ever seen before. So both President Trump and Vice President Biden have talked about releasing plans very soon about distribution. But I would point out that there are definitely some specific needs that you'll see on a distribution side. And one of them really right up the top is the stringent temperature requirements are going to be needed to ensure efficacy. This is not just moving toilet paper. This is, having to be temperature controlled. There are supply chain designs that have to be tailored necessarily for either for the vaccine or community needs, where you could either go direct to the consumer from origin. You could have a second option would be bulk movements with local cross-docking, or a third option would be to use a warehousing and fulfillment model similar to a lot of e-commerce. You could even face geographic limitations or sustainability impacts. So all of that really does factor into what a response will have to be, and they were all parts of what DHL has been looking at. You mentioned some of the work we've been doing. We just released a report this month on delivering pandemic resilience that looks at the unique challenges of vaccine distribution. I believe a link may be shared along with some other materials afterward this panel, but just the scope of this is going to be immense. To put it into perspective, we're looking at 200,000 or so pallet shipments across probably 15,000 or so flights, and as many as 15 million deliveries in cooling boxes to various locations to maintain the control. So really just very quickly, the pieces that you're going to have to rely on going forward are going to have to look at the two challenges we've seen so far already in the pandemic, which is inbound logistics and domestic distribution. And so government's going to have to partner with the private sector really across developing an emergency response plan that includes logistics and cargo. We have to be at the table and not just be an afterthought. Second, public-private partnerships need to be developed in advance. The same for any crisis. You don't want to be picking up exchanging cards during the middle of a pandemic. Strong physical logistics infrastructure has to be pre-identified. This could be warehousing or transportation capabilities. You need to have IT-enabled supply chain transparency. This way you can measure the existing inventory, predict future demand, and you're going to have a government-led response that includes the private sector in a way that's agile and unconstrained in the ability to respond. I mean, we've all mentioned flexibility. So really all that means that the government will have to partner not only with the pharmaceutical side of the private sector, but with the cargo and logistics side in order to ensure distribution needs, not only for Americans, but around the world.
Thank you, Roger. I hope someone was taking notes on that. That's a lot there to unpack. How about Houston? I know UPS is looking at this as well. Could you share your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do agree wholeheartedly that there's probably two, as we look at future resilience and actually what's coming up most closely. And as I think, as UPS thinks about this, we think about it from a distribution, as been spoken about, but also from a storage perspective. From a distribution perspective, just during this pandemic, UPS has delivered over 100 million supplies relative to the pandemic. And that's over 175 different types of supplies. And that includes going on with distributions, having the right type of knowledge. Fortunately for us, we've got the healthcare expertise. We're very familiar with the healthcare industry and all the requirements associated with these vaccines. So that's a critical component that's going to need to be thought about on the front side to make sure those things aren't missed in transition or just trying to distribute. Special packing, tracking capability, ensure that those distributions, don't miss a beat. We really applaud Operation Warp Speed, which is rolling out, with the plan of distributing over 300 million supplies, which is a lot of products across the industry. So it's going to be us, the cargo industry, the express industry, that's going to be at the forefront of delivering those products, not only in the United States, but all over the world. From a storage perspective, I think the temperature control movement of goods, which is a tremendous capability that we have. I know some of my colleagues do as well at UPS, but also special freezers. Right now we've got special the temperature control sub-zero, anywhere from minus 80 degrees Celsius in order to store these vaccines. We've got a special facility here in the United States, as well as one in the Netherlands, which will allow for up to 300 units, which each unit can basically contain about 48,000 vials. So altogether, distribution capability of keeping these temperature-controlled things, over 14 million opportunities to store the vaccines in 2 different facilities. And we're looking to expand that in UK and Germany and South America as well. So the storage piece of this is extremely important. And I think the collaboration and partnerships become equally important moving forward. And certainly we're continuing to look for those type of partnerships, working with governments around the world, working with the correct healthcare professionals needed to ensure that not only can we store them, but we can ensure that they're maintained and we don't lose the efficiency of those vaccines when they're distributed through these supply chains.
Thank you, Houston. Yes, there's a lot to think about, and I just really appreciate all of you sharing your thoughts and looking ahead and sharing it with the audience here today. Bobby, what are some additional thoughts that you have regarding what policymakers should be thinking about looking ahead for air cargo?
Yeah, thanks, Yvette. Jim talked about at the beginning about the collaboration that happened across the industry as we are working our way through this crisis. Let's face it, we all have said in one time or another that none of us have done this before. So we were figuring out how to get through this and doing the best we could with what information was available, what we could get from authorities, and what we could share amongst one another. What I'd like to see in the future and what would benefit our industry as well as the ability to respond to these kinds of crises and recover more quickly is that regulatory authorities have the same sort of openness and transparency and collaboration that happens. It's not necessarily a natural perspective or approach to take, but we have some frameworks with ICAO and the G7 that Jim mentioned and other mechanisms that are in place around the world that help us to rationalize policies and procedures so that our crews have consistent testing no matter where they fly, that there's consistent definition of essential workers, and that there's simplified customs clearance that doesn't inhibit business. What also would be incredibly helpful is if regulatory authorities would adopt a performance-based regulatory framework, which would allow each one of the carriers to build the systems that make us the safest while accommodating the unique operations we all have. That's what we do very effectively under the FAA. It makes us it puts us in a position to be able to respond to exceptions that happen in our system without being boxed in to our response and limited in the ways that we can address or develop contingencies to ensure that we're addressing risk as it appears in our system. So those barriers can be dropped much more quickly in the future. And I think we've built now a conversation, or we're starting to build a conversation around what would help us with extensive collaboration. And you started off this whole conversation by talking about resiliency. That's really the most important thing. What's going to make us stronger in the future? Crises like these happen, And it's not just a matter of survival, it's a matter of coming out of these crises, being stronger at the end of it.
Thank you, Bobby. Excellent thoughts. So Houston, could you share your thoughts as we get ready to close out? But what are some of the things that policymakers could be thinking of looking ahead?
Yeah, well, I certainly would agree with Bobby's assessment of a risk-based approach. I think given the tremendous collaboration that goes on with the WHO, CDC, various agencies that want to continue to have the movement of goods around the world to make sure that these critical infrastructure supplies are not impeded by overly prescriptive rules and requirements. So that harmonization piece is certainly one base, but the harmonization based on risk. And this whole concept of one size fits all is certainly something that doesn't work in our industry. And we certainly believe from a policymaker perspective, folks should think about ensuring that the rules are flexible enough for operators to continue to move the critical goods, but also provides protections in that the different governments will allow for. We think there's room for both. From a testing protocol, especially for our pilots who are at the tip of the spear, as I mentioned earlier, to really come up with some type of testing protocols that's not overly invasive. And I can tell you, we've had folks that literally in some instances, based on a test, physically were crying because of the difficulties associated with those tests. And we had other governments who accomplished the same testing, without that type of invasive protocol. So how do we ensure that the policies and there's a collective effort, because the end game is to keep folks moving, to take away these roadblocks that are going to have people, pause to shut down. And then the last thing I would mention is from a repatriation perspective. As I talked about earlier, it's really important for this industry, for our pilots to trust that when they're over somewhere flying around the world, that if something happens, we can get them home safely. And so the repatriation policies that we should administer for other countries and we should expect from others should be such that as long as we're following the risk-based approach, following the WHO and CDC guidelines, that there aren't overly prescriptive protocols where our pilots and others end up getting stuck in countries in lockdown for reasons none other than a lack of harmonization. So if we're going to continue to move this industry forward, move these critical vaccines and other supplies, it's really important that those type of issues are addressed from the forefront. And certainly from a UPS perspective, we continue to collaborate with others, the other distinguished panelists here and others in the industry to ensure that those type of efforts continue to move forward. So thanks, Yvette.
Thank you. And thank you so much to our panel for sharing your thoughts today. Air cargo services are essential to the US economy now more than ever. We heard about you moving essential PPE and supplies, responding to the growth in e-commerce and helping small businesses survive, moving goods through the airports that have cargo services and districts that are meaningful. So I'm going to turn it back. I'm going to close this panel out, but thank you again. And I'm going to turn it back to Pat and Leighton to close.
Thanks, Yvette.
Pat, are you back?
I am back. So again, thank you to all the, on behalf of the Air Cargo Caucus co-chairs Mitchell and Bustos, as well as myself on Leighton's behalf, we wanted to thank all the attendees that were able to join us today, the members of Congress that joined in, the Cargo Airline Association for helping their moderators facilitate this event, as well as the entire industry panel. Definitely covered a lot today, very informative, very helpful. For anybody that does have follow-up questions, because obviously we covered a lot today and the nature of a Zoom, we can't exactly make it as interactive as we usually would like. Please do not hesitate to reach out to the caucus. We're here to facilitate communication, share information, and I think this is a really good way to do so. So again, thank you to everybody that participated, everyone that attended today. Leighton, do you have any concluding thoughts you'd like to share with the group?
Nope, I just want to say, since we gave a shout out to Congressman Mitchell at the top, also thank you, Pat, for being such a great partner in working on the Air Cargo Caucus. You make leading the caucus very easy for me.
Thank you, and
everyone.
likewise.
Yeah,
thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.